They say working with animals is a privilege, but it's easy to forget that some creatures are not tamed, only contained. In the wild, they roam vast oceans, hunt with precision, and rule without mercy. Inside a tank, their world shrinks, but their instincts remain. On a cold February afternoon, at a small marine park in British Columbia, a promising 20-year-old trainer found herself in the water with 3 orcas. At first, it looked like a playful accident, until the water churned and the true nature of these apex predators surfaced. Witnesses watched in shock as every escape was blocked, every breath stolen, and the minutes ticked toward an ending no one could stop. This is the story of the day captivity turned deadly, and of the first life claimed by an orca who would kill again. Welcome back, new and returning viewers. Remember to subscribe, like, and share to keep these stories alive. Now, this is what happened. Keltie Byrne was the kind of person who made people believe in the beauty of the ocean. Born and raised in Canada, she had grown up with the icy waters of British Columbia in her blood. She was a natural athlete, a competitive swimmer who could cut through water like it was part of her. By the time she turned 20, she was already chasing her dream of becoming a marine biologist, studying at university while working part-time at a small marine park tucked along the Victoria waterfront, Sealand of the Pacific. Sealand wasn't SeaWorld. It didn't have the towering stadiums or elaborate shows. Instead, it had something far more intimate and far more dangerous. Its main attraction was a trio of killer whales. Tilikum, a towering 12,000-pound of power male. Nootka 4, a dominant and unpredictable female. And Haida, younger but equally formidable. They performed together in a pool that was just 100 feet long and barely 35 feet across. A cramped, dark, and frigid tank that was nothing like the endless expanse of the ocean these animals were born to roam. For visitors, the shows were thrilling. Massive black and white bodies leaping from the water, spraying the crowd, showcasing the intelligence and power of these apex predators. But for the trainers, the shows were also a gamble. Sealand had no in-water performances. Trainers worked from the platforms, careful to keep a safe distance. And there was a reason for that caution. Those who had worked with the orcas knew they could be unpredictable. More than once, trainers had been pulled or knocked into the water. The whales didn't always follow commands. Sometimes they refused to let a trainer leave the pool. There were whispers that Tilikum, the largest of them all, had a darker streak. Not malicious in a human sense, but wild, unpredictable, and entirely capable of overpowering anyone who entered his world. Yet Keltie wasn't afraid. She was respected by her colleagues for her calmness around the animals, her strong swimming ability, and her quiet determination to earn their trust. She understood the danger, but she also believed in the bond between human and animal. What she didn't know was that the bond she thought she had was about to shatter. And on a cold afternoon in February 1991, one wrong step would place her at the mercy of 3 predators who had never truly been tamed. And once she was in the water, they would not let her go. February 20th, 1991. The winter air clung to Victoria's waterfront, cold enough to sting the skin, but not enough to keep the crowd away. It was mid-afternoon at Sealand of the Pacific, and the final performance of the day was coming to a close. From the stands, families and tourists looked down into the small orca pool, watching the sleek black and white bodies circle lazily after their last set of tricks. On the platform stood Keltie Byrne, her wetsuit damp from the spray, her breath curling into the chilly air. She moved with the easy confidence of someone at home in this place, her eyes scanning the water as Tilikum, Nootka 4, and Haida swam below. The show was over. The orcas had earned their food. Trainers began to tidy the area, the crowd slowly thinning, chatter mixing with the sound of water lapping against concrete. Keltie stepped back toward the edge, maybe to collect equipment, maybe to glance one more time at the whales she loved working with. And then it happened. Her foot slipped. There was a splash sharp enough to cut through the noise of the park. At first, it drew only curious looks from the few guests still lingering in the stands. Trainers had fallen in before. It was rare, but it happened. And usually the orcas simply drifted back while the trainer climbed out. But this time, the reaction was different. The water came alive. In an instant, Nootka 4 and Haida 2 closed in, their massive bodies gliding toward her. Witnesses later recalled seeing Keltie try to swim to the nearest platform, her arms cutting through the frigid water. But each time she neared the edge, one of the whales would intercept her, surfacing with a flash of teeth before sinking beneath her path. What began as what some thought was a game turned unsettlingly deliberate. The orcas moved with precision, one blocking, the other circling, their dark shapes shadowing her beneath the surface. In the crowd, voices rose from curiosity to concern, and then to alarm. Trainers rushed along the platforms, yelling commands, extending poles, tossing life rings toward her. And then, the water seemed to deepen. From the far side of the pool, a shape emerged, larger than the others, a black dorsal fin towering like a blade. Tilikum. At over 20 feet long and weighing more than 6 tons, he was the largest orca in captivity anywhere in the world. Until now, he had stayed back, watching. But in that moment, he began to close the distance, his massive head breaking the water, the cold Pacific light catching in his dark eyes. The crowd's shouts blurred into the sound of water slapping against concrete, the air thick with panic. Keltie was still moving, still fighting toward the edge. But with each passing second, the space between her and the largest killer whale in the tank grew smaller. And then, Tilikum came in from the shadows. The pool erupted in chaos. Water surged as all 3 orcas closed in, their sleek black backs slicing through the surface. Keltie's head broke the water, her face pale from the cold, eyes wide with terror. She swam hard toward the nearest platform, her arms straining, fingertips just inches from the edge, until a sudden rush of white water rose beside her. A massive body brushed past, cutting her off. Another orca surged from beneath, the swell knocking her back into open water. Witnesses in the stands would later recall the sound, not just the splashing, but the sharp gasps for breath, the frantic churn of water as Keltie fought to stay above the surface. Every time she found her direction, the whales were there, corralling her like prey. She tried again, pushing toward a corner of the pool, her hand reaching out, only for a sudden tug to rip her under. Gasps echoed from the stands. Seconds later, she reappeared, coughing, fighting to catch her breath. By now, the crowd had turned from curious to horrified. Parents pulled children closer. Some screamed for someone to help. Trainers raced along the platforms, poles in hand, shouting commands that went unanswered. They tossed bright orange life rings toward her, but the orcas blocked them, their huge bodies gliding between her and safety. Then from the center of the pool, Tilikum made his move. At over 6 tons, he was a wall of muscle and power, a force unlike anything else in captivity. He surged forward with terrifying speed, the water rising against his bulk. In a single motion, his mouth closed around Keltie's foot, pulling her beneath the surface with a force that no human could resist. The stands erupted. Trainers leaned dangerously over the edge, trying to reach her. She broke the surface for a moment, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I don't want to die." It was raw, desperate, words that would haunt those who heard them for decades to come. But the whales were unrelenting. They dove beneath her, surged beside her, and each time she neared an escape, she was pulled back into the center of the pool, further from hope, deeper into their control. And above the frantic scene, no one yet understood the terrible truth. This was not just an accident. It was the first fatal strike of an orca who would kill again. The audience's cheers had long turned into heavy breaths, then into a suffocating silence broken only by shouts from the edge of the pool. Trainers ran along the sides, arms waving, tossing handfuls of fish into the water, hoping instinct would overpower whatever had taken hold of the whales' minds. But Sealand's design, 3 connected tanks, with no direct deck-level access to the main pool, was a trap in itself. There was no way to reach Keltie without climbing down into the water, and if they did, they would be stepping directly into the reach of 12,000 pounds of muscle and teeth. One wrong move, and there would be another body in the water. Keltie surfaced once, just once, her arms flailing, eyes wide with a terror that would never leave the memory of those who saw it. The moment was brief, so brief that even those closest to the glass questioned if they had truly seen her at all. The next instant, her body was yanked back into the churning darkness. Tilikum was not alone. The two females, Haida II and Nootka IV, moved with him like shadows, cutting off every path to the surface. Each time Keltie tried to push toward open water, one of them would rise, blocking her, forcing her back toward the center of the tank. Every second mattered. Every second lost felt like another nail in the coffin. Trainers shouted her name, banged on the rails, threw fish, anything to break the whale's attention, but nothing broke the unity of that deadly trio. And then, the pool went still. No splashes, no movement, no sign of life breaking the surface. Just a wide expanse of glassy, dark water that hid its secrets well. By the time the water went still, it was already too late. The hours that followed were a haze of horror. The stadium, once filled with cheers, now sat in an eerie silence, the only sounds coming from the restless slaps of orca tails against the water. Trainers, pale-faced and trembling, worked to lure the whales into the back pool, their voices quivering as they called out commands the animals had long since stopped obeying. It took hours before Tilikum, Haida, and Nootka were finally corralled into a smaller holding pen. Only then could divers, their movements slow and reluctant, descend into the now still main tank. The water, cold and clouded, revealed what no one wanted to see. Keltie Byrne, motionless, her body suspended like a ghost beneath the surface. When they brought her up, the reality was inescapable. Official reports would confirm the cause of death, drowning by forcible submersion. But those who witnessed it didn't need a coroner's statement to understand what had happened. British Columbia awoke the next morning to headlines that didn't just report a tragedy, they screamed it. Orca kills young trainer at Sealand of the Pacific, blared across newspapers. Television stations replayed shaky footage of emergency crews and the distraught faces of her colleagues. The shockwave hit hard. Keltie wasn't just a name in print. She was a beloved athlete, a rising star, a young woman whose life had been stolen in front of a crowd. The damage to Sealand's reputation was immediate and irreversible. Within a year, the park's gates would close forever, its tanks drained, its show pools abandoned. But for those who thought this marked the end of the story, they were wrong. Because the orca at the center of it all, the massive, imposing male named Tilikum, was not done. His time at Sealand had ended, but his journey and the trail of violence that would follow him had only just begun. But Tilikum's story and his violence was far from over. The orca tanks at Sealand fell silent after that day. The water, once alive with the sound of splashes and whistles, now mirrored only the gray sky above British Columbia. In the weeks that followed, the public demanded answers. How could this have happened? And why were these massive predators kept in such cramped quarters? Within months, Sealand made a decision it could never reverse. The three orcas, once the star attractions, were separated, shipped thousands of miles away. Tilikum and Nootka IV were sent to SeaWorld Orlando in Florida, their arrival quiet, almost secretive. Haida II was sent to SeaWorld San Antonio in Texas. What should have been a fresh start was, for at least one of them, the beginning of something far darker. For Tilikum, the change in scenery did not erase what had happened in Victoria's Harbor that day. In his new home, the tank was bigger, the shows flashier, but the isolation, the dominance of the other whales, and the unrelenting cycle of performance continued. Behind his glass enclosure, there was a shadow growing. Trainers whispered that he was unpredictable, that his size made him dangerous to work with. Years later, that whisper turned into a scream. In 1999, the body of Daniel Dukes, a man who had snuck into the park after hours, was found draped over Tilikum's back, his injuries horrifying. And in 2010, tragedy struck again. During a live Dine with Shamu show, senior trainer Dawn Brunchot was pulled into the water and killed, her final moments witnessed by a stadium full of visitors. Animal welfare experts pointed to the same truth. Confinement, the lack of space to roam, and the deep psychological stress of captivity could warp even the most intelligent and social creatures. Tilikum's life had been carved into a story of spectacle, profit, and tragedy. A story that began the moment he was torn from the wild. And as the years passed, one haunting reality remained. Tilikum's name would forever be linked with death. But the most chilling part, the full truth about what happened to him in the wild before his capture and how it shaped the monster he became, was still buried beneath the waves. The incident at Sealand of the Pacific didn't just scar the small Canadian marine park, it ignited a debate that still rages to this day. Marine biologists have long spoken about the orca's intelligence. Dr. Paul Spong, a prominent researcher from British Columbia, once described them as thinking, feeling, socially complex beings, creatures that remember, that grieve, and that do not forget. Former trainers in hindsight have echoed those sentiments, admitting that years of forced performances, limited space, and isolation from family pods may push these apex predators toward unpredictable and sometimes deadly behavior. Inside a wild ocean, an orca's range can stretch hundreds of miles. Inside a concrete tank, that range shrinks to a fraction of a percent. What is playful curiosity in the wild can transform into frustration behind glass walls. Dr. Naomi Rose, a marine mammal scientist, has stated publicly that no amount of human care can replace the freedom of the ocean. Her words strike even harder when we remember that these are top predators, weighing several tons, armed with intelligence and instinct that captivity can twist in dangerous ways. The moral dilemma cuts deep. Are we, in our fascination, guilty of building cages for minds too vast to be contained? And if we had truly listened, if the warning signs from February 20th, 1991, had been taken as the final alarm, would two more names, Daniel Dukes in 1999 and Don Brunchot in 2010, still be alive today? Because history has a way of whispering before it screams. And when it comes to the legacy of Keltie Byrne, the question lingers like a shadow over every orca tank in the world. Was her death the beginning of a lesson we refuse to learn? They say you can measure a life not by its length, but by the ripples it leaves behind. For those who knew Keltie Byrne, those ripples were endless. Friends remember a young woman whose laugh could cut through the cold Pacific air, whose gentle hands had soothed countless animals, and whose ambition burned bright in the dim corridors of Sealand of the Pacific. She was more than a trainer. She was a bridge between worlds, believing that understanding could grow where fear lived. But her death was a fracture, a moment that should have rewritten history. Yet as the years passed, the lessons blurred. The same orcas who had pulled her under would spend the rest of their lives in concrete tanks, Tilikum's story in particular, stretching into tragedy after tragedy. Experts warn that captivity reshapes a wild creature in ways science is only beginning to grasp. Isolation, boredom, and confinement erode the instincts honed by miles of open ocean. It is not just the body that suffers, it is the mind. And when the mind of a predator turns inward, the results can be fatal. Perhaps the most haunting question lingers like a shadow over the industry. If the world had truly listened after Keltie Byrne, would Daniel Dukes still be alive? Would Don Brunchot? Keltie's story is more than a cautionary tale. It is a reminder of the cost of forgetting. And as the tide of public opinion shifts, it calls on all of us to decide what kind of future we choose for these apex predators, and for ourselves. In the end, the ocean never claimed Keltie Byrne. A tank did. If this story moved you, like, subscribe and share it, and speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. The tide can still change.